says human trafficking is happening here. And what happens with that social media post is it spreads like wildfire. And then everyone starts thinking that specific situation is human trafficking, right? And unfortunately, that's not the what we see again here in East Tennessee. It's not that snatch and grab. It's not stranger danger. It's not some person popping out of the bush saying, "Hey, it's time to get trafficked." It's the people that we would least expect to be the traffickers, to be the bad people, which we'll go into who those people are. But we have to know kind of what is human trafficking. It's the violation of human rights, right? Some people call it modern day slavery. Involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial act. So very vague, just human trafficking. We'll kind of dig into the different types of human trafficking, especially what we see here in East Tennessee. But it's important to know this is a major crime industry. It's the second highest crime in the world. So this is something that's happening not only overseas, not only in bigger cities like New York and in LA, but it's also happening here in Tennessee, in East Tennessee, in places that we know, people that we love. It's happening in our backyard in plain sight. So I, also just kind of want to specify that there's a lot of gray area when it comes to the cases, the stories that we hear. It's not always black and white. It's going to have a lot of different, there's going to be some similarities when it comes to those indicators, but each person's story is different. So unfortunately, I can't give you this like golden book saying, here's what human trafficking is, go save the world. It's going to require and involve a lot of digging, a lot of investigating, and in my opinion, just going with your gut if you feel like something's wrong. So first talk about sex trafficking. Of course, there's that force, fraud, or coercion. We'll be talking about sex trafficking quite a bit during this training, but it is that force, fraud, or coercion to make someone engage in a commercial sex act. And we'll talk about what commercial sex act means, but it's important to understand, like I said, that with sex trafficking as well, it's not all black and white. This is a very unique type of victimization, and we're going to have to be really on our toes in whatever field you work, especially if you work with those high-risk populations, of what it looks like. So it's not always going to be very apparent. It's not going to, you're never going to have someone, or very rarely, you're going to have someone come up to you and saying, hey, I'm being trafficked. Usually they're coming up to you or they're needing help for another reason, being homeless or having some sort of substance abuse issue or having this like toxic family of origin environment. So again, that exchange is going to be very difficult for us to see in public. It's very rarely going to naturally present itself, and you're going to have to dig and investigate. So I'm not trying to be the Debbie Downer in this whole thing, but I just kind of want to be upfront with you guys and transparent of what's going on. So we'll be talking about familial trafficking and intimate partner trafficking. So with familial trafficking, it usually happens when a family member acts as the trafficker. Can anyone guess who is the trafficker when it comes to a family member? And you all can unmute yourselves. You all can write in the chat box. We're a small group, so
I'd say mother or brother.
Right, mother. Anyone else? Any other guesses?
Brother.
Uncle. All right. So usually I always get like the males. It's usually the stepdad, the brother, the uncle, the grandfather. Most of the time it's mom. And that's usually kind of where we have people like jaw dropping in the audience, like the mom. That's kind of why it's the perfect crime. It's people we would least expect in being the bad person. With familial trafficking, it's kind of really common in those rural areas. And in rural areas, we have what's in rural areas? Nothing. We have lack of resources. They are geographically isolated. So it's kind of those areas that have, issues of poverty, those, opioid issues and whatnot. With familial trafficking, a lot of times it's multi-generational. So that means mom was trafficked before, and mom was probably trafficked by her mom or someone in the family, and just kind of went down the, the family chain. And when that happens, it's very normalized behavior. So if, mom's trafficking little Sally, here comes Grandpa Joe giving her a pat on the back saying, hey, kiddo, thanks for helping us pay for rent. So, if you're working with DCS or having to do a house visit and you're seeing if, little Sally was trafficked or abused, it's normal to her. I mean, she's going to think that every other family member or every other family goes through this, so she's not going to question it. She might acknowledge the abuse in that, but she's not going to say, yeah, I'm actually being trafficked. Especially as a kid, she's not going to make that connection. I mean, intimate partner trafficking is the other type of sex trafficking we talk about, and is also very common here in East Tennessee. Sometimes we have clients, or we have survivors at our safe house that have left their previous home from their family. They've been either kicked out, they have some family issues, drug abuse, sexual abuse, met a boyfriend online or through a mutual friend, right? It's not a stranger. That relationship was built. He's quickly asked her to move in with her. He's slowly pushing her personal boundaries throughout that whole process. And she's going to either feel obligated to do that because she loves him. And if she doesn't, he usually has some sort of blackmail against her. Maybe he has a previous photo or a video, and given the fact that he knows who she is and he knows who's around her, her relationship, her family, her friends, he can easily exploit her and say, I'm going to show this to your family. I'm going to show this to your pastor. I'm going to show this to your classmates. Whoever it is, they know her, that victim's family and that support around them. And that's usually why they isolate them from family and friends. So it's important that if you do, for example, work with a client like that, or have a friend that's in that situation, we build that relationship at the beginning, and not, we obviously don't want to come about it in a, judgy way. If they do tell us that they're in that situation, we're gonna have to really, understand that whole trust that was built at the very beginning of the relationship, which we'll do that later on down the road with these slides. But these are the most common types of sex trafficking: familial trafficking and intimate partner trafficking. And if you all have questions, unmute yourselves. We're a small group. I don't care if you all interrupt me. This is a small group. Labor trafficking is the other type of most common type of human trafficking we see here in East Tennessee. So there's that forced fraud or coercion, and it's used to subject that person to some sort of involuntary servitude. They're getting paid little, they're getting paid none. We're seeing that it's happening in domestic work, agricultural work, hospitality, door-to-door sales. It's harder to spot labor trafficking, especially when it happens, in these businesses where you're not seeing what's kind of happening behind closed doors. We're seeing demographic wise, it's happening to more people that are coming to the States for a better job opportunity, whether they have documentation or not. They might be here on a visa, they might not be. Sometimes the trafficker has recruited them or kind of given them sort of false promises of, I'll pay for your ticket, I'll fly you over from overseas here, you'll get paid this much money, I'll pay for everything. And then that person will come, and then traffickers, the reality is that they don't get any of that. Traffickers lock them up, working them, God knows how many hours in a week. Sometimes we've seen where labor trafficking has turned into sex trafficking. So we've had instances where survivors have been labor trafficked at a restaurant, and that night that restaurant turned into a brothel. And we're seeing also that it's more challenging for these folks that are coming from a different country to the U.S. to ask for help, just because of the fear, right? Traffickers put in there that they're going to call ICE, deport them, not pay them anything whatsoever. Sometimes these people are the sole income and are sending money to family back overseas. So that kind of adds that extra layer of fear of why they're not going to ask for help. And honestly, even that cultural barrier. Maybe they have this bad image or stigma of what law enforcement is, that they're going to, ship them back overseas, whatever it is. But it does make it challenging in asking for help and getting the resources.
Yeah.
Kids are really easy. I'm sorry?
Question.
Yeah.
How you mentioned the labor trafficking turning into sex trafficking? What's the prevalence of the other direction? In other words, one
Going to
person.
labor trafficking.
Yeah.
I don't have that statistic for you. I mean, it does happen. It definitely does
That's one thing
happen.
that kind of comes to mind is you get a young lady over here that starts out in sex trafficking. She no longer becomes, I don't know, a desirable, if you will.
Mhm.
But she hasn't paid her debt or whatever it is, and then pops into some other industry, labor industry. Is that something you're seeing or not? Or is that just maybe a myth?
I mean, I don't think it definitely could happen. We've not had that experience yet.
Okay.
Um, I think we had a client that was on the verge of being labor trafficked after being sex trafficked. We think we
Right,
were
right.
able to get her out of that situation, but that's something that could definitely happen. I think just now what we're seeing is that there's more of that need of sex trafficking. There's that demand of sex trafficking more, especially here in East Tennessee. Um, I was going to mention also kids are really easy to labor traffic. They are paid the least, or just kind of with minimum wage. They don't really know better when it comes to, taxes and whatnot. We've had kids who've been labor trafficked, exploited the most, and because of their kind of their legal incapacity of taxes and minimum wage, they really don't have the access to those resources. So I just kind of want to touch base of, what does force, fraud, and coercion mean? What are some examples of that? And what does a commercial act mean? When we go back to sex trafficking, and you have to have that force, fraud, or coercion to engage that person in some sort of commercial act. What could a commercial act mean, right? So it means profit oriented, but what could that profit be? What could be exchanged? Money. What else could be exchanged?
Food,
Food, drugs,
nice clothes.
nice clothes, shelter,
Hmm.
a job opportunity, health insurance, braces for their kid. It could be anything, right? We really have to have a broad understanding of what that commercial act could look like. And that kind of, again, makes it challenging to catch that act happening right then and there. How do we know when, health insurance was exchanged or that job opportunity was offered? That transaction might not happen right then and there for us to see that indicator, that sign. We're going to have to dig. We're going to have to look at each situation case by case. And we're looking at, what does force mean? Of course, it could mean beating. It's not the zip ties on the wrists and locked up in a cage image. Maybe metaphorically that is kind of how our survivors feel, but we'll go into why traffickers are not doing the whole snatch and grab, at least here in East Tennessee, or it's not very common to happen. But usually we've seen traffickers beat their victims a couple of times to the point where they're terrified of their trafficker or of leaving. With fraud, there's false promises of, some adventure or this, too good to be true job. Like you'll get $700 a week if you just do this for me, or, whatever it is. Or coercion, again, threats of trafficking their kids. We've had survivors that were married to their trafficker. Trafficker said, if you don't do this, I'm gonna traffic our kid. Or abusive legal processes as, filing a false police report. Traffickers know that unfortunately, some uninformed law enforcement might slap a prostitution charge on a woman and not really kind of dig and investigate to see if she actually, is positive or, says yes to being trafficked. So he's going to file a false police report, say that she has stolen something or has substances on her, and kind of get her on the bad radar for law enforcement. So that's why we also do trainings for them to make sure that if they do encounter, a victim in that situation, they're going to know what to ask and what to look for when it comes to those indicators. So just kind of want to clarify what does force, fraud, or coercion mean, and what does commercial act mean. I don't want you all to get stuck on these numbers because our traffickers putting on their tax return that they trafficked 46 people. No, it's kind of just giving us a baseline of when it comes to slavery in general. And here in the States, what we're looking at throughout this presentation, I'm going to be using pronouns her and she as the victim. Men and boys are trafficked. And I'll be using pronouns he and him as a trafficker. We know that women also trafficked as well. So I just kind of want to clarify that before I go on. On average, 2 children are trafficked every minute. I mean, kids are very high risk of being trafficked for many reasons, which we'll go into in a little bit. But we're seeing, again, the majority of those victims are women and girls. And I'll tell you, last year, I would say more than half of our clientele were minors, or more than half of the people that we serve were minors. Unfortunately, that number is growing. So we definitely have to be on the lookout of these high-risk populations and figure out how can we think 2 steps ahead and preventing this in ways that we can intervene.
So you're saying that 27% number is low for our area?
Yes, we are above average
Wow.
in a bad way.
Yeah.
I think I have put in the next couple of slides that we had 147 folks that we served, and that was kind of low just due to COVID, and 101 were minors.
That's the other statistic I'm looking at is those numbers are double the COVID deaths.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a staggering number. I mean, the COVID deaths are bad enough, but
Yeah,
that's a
for
staggering
sure.
number.
It is, it's unfortunate. And that's kind of why we do these trainings, that hopefully people really understand that this is not like happens 1 in a million here in the US. It's, as you can tell on the map, this is from the human trafficking hotline. They're getting these calls, and these are the calls where they're getting from. So it's, we're seeing in those red and orange areas that it's in those bigger cities, but you're also seeing it's in rural areas. The calls that they're getting are in those rural areas. So usually that means, someone's in a bad situation themselves, or someone's seeing something to where they're thinking this might be human trafficking. I don't have it on this PowerPoint, but back in 2011, counties with the highest prevalence of human trafficking in Tennessee were Shelby, Davison, Knox, and Coffee County. So definitely those bigger cities, but it definitely is happening in those rural areas. According to TBI, back in 2019, which is not too long ago, human trafficking was reported in every single county in Tennessee. So it's definitely happening in every single county. We cannot deny that fact. And I wish I could give you per county, how many cases we have, but those are underreported as well. Everything is going to be underreported. Not everyone's going to understand what human trafficking is. Again, we're seeing the two most common types of trafficking are from the traffickers have a relationship with their victim. They know that person. So it's a very underreported crime, unfortunately. Coming into this job, previously I worked at the Crisis Center in Bristol, Virginia. I worked mainly with folks that we worked a hotline doing suicide prevention. 10, 15 years ago, there wasn't a lot of talk about it. It was almost kind of taboo here in the South to talk about suicide and human trafficking. Starting this job, I was really shocked to see how little information we had, 20 years ago about it. This has been happening forever. For this being the second highest crime, there's not that much research. There's not a lot of support when it comes to research of what we're seeing, and even just the long-term effects, the psychological effects that we're seeing on those our clients. I need to quit saying victims. I'm so sorry. On a good note, Tennessee is doing a wonderful job when it comes to the best response of assessing law enforcement approaches and legislation and survivor services. So 10 years ago, every single state had this failing grade when it came to assessing all that. Thankfully, Tennessee is doing pretty good when it comes to all that. So go Vols. Hopefully our football team will be better and be number one. Can only wish. So that map was from 2017, of where they're getting those calls from the hotline, right? Check out Tennessee from 2017. We go to 2018. The state is pretty much covered, right? So that's meaning that someone is in a bad situation, is needing help, or someone is seeing something to where they're saying something's fishy and I'm going to report it. So again, this is definitely not going anywhere. This is becoming a bigger issue. I'm very curious to see how 2020 is when it comes to the hotline. We're seeing that in 2020, people were even more socially isolated. People lost jobs. We had these vulnerable populations that were even more vulnerable in 2020. What that has done, we'll only probably find out like in 10 years and look at that research of, the rates of that victimization in 2020. Hopefully 2021 will be more graceful to us. I went too fast. So like I said, this is Tennessee statistics. This is from 2018 from the Human Trafficking Hotline. Those numbers are very, very low. Again, that just shows this is very, very underreported. And with these trainings, we hope that when we kind of give you all a good foundation of what it looks like, that you all can be those community advocates to where if you see something or you work with those high-risk populations, you're going to know what to do, how to report, how to respond to it. Kind of went too quick with my slides. So I want to talk about vulnerable populations. Anyone can be, can be trafficked because we all have vulnerabilities. It's not this, it's a rare thing that happens to, so many people. It's just random. It's randomized. It could happen to anybody. Poverty is one of the biggest vulnerabilities that we're seeing. Is poverty creates despair. And traffickers are going to target specifically people that are poor and marginalized in those communities and offer some sort of false opportunity to improve their circumstances. And usually those people in those situations, because they really don't have any other options, are going to take that risk in order to provide for themselves or to provide for their family, right? They're going in a survival mode. Addiction. We're going through not only Corona is ruining our lives. There's also an opioid epidemic, and people are going to substances to deal with what we're going through in 2020. Traffickers are going to use that substance dependency and addiction to control that trafficked individual. So traffickers are going to purposefully supply that drug and kind of lure them, that vulnerable population, break down their resistance and coerce them into that labor or forced labor or sex. And as that person becomes dependent on that particular substance, that trafficker uses that vulnerability to keep them in that cycle of abuse. Mental health. Again, Corona has done all of the above when it comes to these vulnerable populations. We have people that are, now have no way to provide for their family, pay for rent. They're going through addiction, that have developed mental health issues from just being socially isolated. So I'm sure we're going to see, like I said, in 10 years, an increase when it comes to human trafficking. But people with mental health issues, face a variety of challenges, including that isolation, the diminished capacity to kind of offer informed consent, the limited ability to assess risk, or someone that has ill intentions. So their traffickers are skilled in detecting those vulnerabilities and manipulating them to their advantage. Kind of want to take you all to the next slide. I'm take you all back to intro to psych class, Maslow hierarchy of needs. It's the 5 stages of human needs that motivate our behavior. In order for someone to reach self-actualization, right, the most basic of human physical and psychological needs, they have to have those, everything below met. So food, hunger, shelter, love, safety, all of that. So traffickers are utilizing Maslow's hierarchy of needs when it comes to finding, recruiting, manipulating, and controlling their victims. When we're working with these clients, we have to look, or just when you're working with anyone or just having that relationship with that person, if they don't have the bottom 3 layers, they're going to be looking for that. And that's what we're seeing with these populations in the next slide. These marginalized populations, they don't have the physiological needs. They don't have the safety. They don't have the love and the self and belonging. So what we're seeing, on this list is just a few populations that I put on the slides. Are those, marginalized from society. And it's very indicative of that predatory nature of this crime. So they exploit off of people's vulnerabilities, and it could happen to anybody. It's kind of like cancer. It knows no boundaries. So the misconception that people put themselves in dangerous situations, sometimes we very, seldom see someone that has just made a lot of bad mistakes, but usually they've come from, they have a bad history. They grew up in a really bad environment. But it's very, very seldom that, we see someone that's wanting to go into this. No one wakes up in the morning and saying, what do I want to do when I grow up? I want to, sell myself, and I like these conditions, and I like how my trafficker beats me, and I like how the purchaser beats me. So anyone can really be exploited because we have all those vulnerabilities. And I kind of want to touch base on a couple of these populations that you guys interact with all the time. Kids in foster care, in group homes. Traffickers, unfortunately, know that if these kids disappear off the grid, they are less likely to be checked on if they fall in through the cracks. They know that these, excuse me, they know that these kids want to be loved and want to be needed. And that sometimes the transition from one home to another can be rough. And, that DCS, we work with them very closely. Almost 90% of our referrals come from DCS. Sometimes there can be a salty experience. It can be a vicious cycle. So when we have kids in foster care or group homes run away, that puts them even more at risk. And a scary number to think of is within 48 hours of a kid running away, 1 out of 3 kids will be approached by a trafficker. So traffickers know these kids are jackpot, which I hate saying. If we really want to understand how human trafficking is, We have to look at it from each perspective. And for a trafficker, we have to know, who is he looking at? Who is he looking for? He's looking for vulnerable populations, and kids in foster care and group homes are vulnerable, extremely vulnerable. Anyone that was previously sexually or emotionally abused, of course, is more at risk of being trafficked, especially if they're a minor. You see that when young females were abused by their father or their stepfather, usually they grow up, being in a relationship or married to someone with those same characteristics. Of course, the homeless populations, again, they kind of don't have any sort of resource. So sometimes, they know that they're going into a bad situation, but they don't have any other alternative or any sort of resources. For a trafficker, it would not be business smart to kidnap somebody in a Target parking lot. And I hate saying it, but we have to think of how he thinks, and it's not gonna be smart for him to just snatch some kid in the parking lot or in public, because he knows that someone's gonna notice that they're missing, that law enforcement's gonna get involved, and that person he's kidnapped is gonna constantly try to escape, right? So for him, it would be easier, it'd be better for him financially to just invest in this person to where they're going to want to stay, and they're going to be dependent on that trafficker. So I just always want to clarify that. There's an older movie, it's called Chosen. I think it's on Vimeo for free. But it gives you real stories of how traffickers have developed that relationship with that person, that individual, to where they don't want to leave, or they feel bad, or whatever case it is. But these traffickers are sweet talkers. They know what to say, they know what to do to prevent that person from leaving that cycle. So we're going to look at a couple of profiles that might look familiar to you guys, or
Question? Good, Doug.
Yeah, looking at the trafficker, is he an independent operator, or usually is it a network of traffickers working for somebody else? Or is that trafficker, I'm trying to get a feel for what's in it for the trafficker per se. Does he owe somebody else, or is he working for himself?
Not necessarily. Usually the trafficker doesn't always have to be like an organization or some affiliate with another person. It's just that person's making money off of that person he's exploiting.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of Tennessee's position in the state's location,
Mhm.
and how important the I-40 highway network is, along with I-95 running down the East Coast. So I was
Right.
just wondering if there was like a cartel connection as well, or not.
We're not seeing that with the clients that we serve. It's just something that's just, a family member is doing it to benefit in buying substances. Maybe they owe someone else money, but we're not having a lot of them that are being like transported to different locations or whatnot. It's just usually a family member or a partner that's, using them, exploiting them for their own purpose.
One of your other slides had the category of poverty dysfunctional family.
Mm-hmm.
Poverty family dysfunction. Are you seeing the opposite of that, rich family dysfunction, or just family dysfunction in general? And how much of that is really perceived dysfunction since we're seeing a lot of minors
Mm-hmm.
that would have a tendency, I think, to get fed up and despaired and mad at their family, and then open themselves up.
Right.
How much of that are we seeing?
Again, I don't have that specific statistic, but we've had instances where we had a kid that grew up in a normal family and was about to go to nursing school.
Right.
Parents were fighting a lot, gotten a divorce, and for her, that was her traumatic stress
Sure.
that led her to, leaving the family, leaving her vulnerable. And she met her trafficker through a friend's party where she, I think, was posting stuff on her Instagram, and trafficker saw that, she was vulnerable and needed that kind of that love, that affection, that attention. He studied her personality. So yeah, for sure, poverty family, folks that are, struggling with poverty, of course, are at high risk, but we've seen, kids coming from normal backgrounds as well being trafficked, but we're seeing a larger percentage are coming from those family of origins that are having financial instability, substance abuse, parents, or there's some sort of abuse between the parents, like domestic violence. So
So To Doug's point on networking, and we deal at the church, just like most church deal with youth groups in that middle school to high school range. You mentioned going to a party and a trafficker being at the party and starting to recognize things. Are they recruiting middle school and high school age kids, and we'll say boys, to scope out a girl that's alone in the lunchroom and just start to get to know her and that type of situation? Is that type of networking going on?
For sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, I mean, for sure, social media has provided anonymity when it comes to how traffickers study that person or pick, figure out who they want to traffic, who is vulnerable. But there are instances where, a girl might meet someone, an older guy at a party. And again, there's been the whole, oh, well, we share 4 or 5 mutual friends, so it should be okay. In actuality, they're a bad person. So it could really be anything. And I hate saying that because I feel like after these trainings, usually parents really paranoid, like, oh my gosh, I can't, let my child out anywhere. And that's why it's important to educate your kids, saying there are bad people out there and they're not going to look bad. They're going to, act like they're your friend. They're going to study you. They're going to want to buy you gifts and just give you all this attention and maybe say that they love you. And you're not going to see it. I mean, these survivors they never see what throughout that grooming process. It's very similar to domestic violence. That grooming process, that recruiting, and throughout that whole time, he's studying her boundaries. He's even pushing her personal boundaries and seeing how far she'll go. And there comes that point where he usually asks her to do something, and either she feels obligated to do it because he's done so much for her that she feels bad, or she's afraid of losing him. And if he really pushes her and there's some sort of force of, hitting her, slapping her, she's terrified to leave because she's afraid of what else he's going to do. So really, it could be all of the above.
And you do offer that training, if I remember right, to middle school, high school agers. It's a specific targeted training. Is that correct?
Yeah, we do. It's called I Empathize. So it talks about empathy with kids and bullying. It's very hard to talk about sex trafficking with high schoolers. Now, we've had some after school programs, I think was it Fulton High School, I believe. I did a training with some seniors and juniors and seniors. So we definitely could do that. We could kind of tweak it down to where we're not talking about too much graphic situations. But I do want kids to understand that, especially with social media, and I'm guilty of using TikTok to watch cat videos and stuff, but I've seen how on TikTok, when kids are trying to bring awareness of human trafficking, which I think is wonderful, what they're putting on there is not accurate. It's, something that would never happen. It's putting a zip tie on your car handle or putting honey on the top of your hood. So they think it's stranger danger. They're always paranoid being on the parking lot, but they would never assume that it's their boyfriend that they met at a party or whatever it is. And that's a dangerous thing, is that we really have to make sure that our kids genuinely understand what it looks like.
Right.
Great question. So we got done with who's at risk, and now we're going to look at some profiles. So Sam is 9 years old, lives in an apartment with his mother. Every couple of weeks, his mom asks him to go spend the afternoon with the apartment manager, Rick. She tells Sam to be a good boy and do what Mr. Rick asks. Sam knows he's being abused, but has no idea that his mom is getting a cut in the rent. Right. So if we have any teachers in here, I kind of always like to add on to the story. So we're never going to recognize Sam's situation because we don't live with Sam at home, but you might see some indicators if you're working with Sam at school or he's in an after school program. Sam's going to be usually the troublemaker, the kid that has poor hygiene, the one that's disruptive, the one that is very defensive whenever you're trying to address him. He's going to be insulting you and just really being that kid where he comes in, you're like, oh God, he's coming. It's that kid. That's usually how these kids present with that kind of behavior. And as helpers, when Sam finally does tell us what's going on at home, we're not going to assume that it's mom that's doing it. We're going to be like, oh my gosh, Mr. Rick is a bad person. We need to put him in jail. But it's important that when we're talking to Sam and, being careful that we're not re-traumatizing him if he's telling us what happened, to really understand who allowed this. Was it Mr. Rick genuinely doing it by himself, or was mom allowing Mr. Rick to do this every month? So Sam's vulnerability was that he trusted his mom. That kids do that. They're going to listen to their parents. You know, he obeyed her orders. And I was kind of touch base of, you know, same as mom either was doing this just because she's a bad person. She wants to supply drugs, but we've had situations where we've heard where moms have done this to help pay for rent because they don't want DCS to take her kids away. I'm not justifying that whatsoever, but it's important to understand there's a lot of gray area. Again, mom's actions were wrong completely, but we just kind of see those stories. So that is a very common profile when it comes to familial trafficking, especially here in East Tennessee. The next profile is the Romeo route or the intimate partner trafficking. So Julia's met Scott at a party at her friend's house. He attends a local college and is able to buy beer for her and her high school friends. They quickly begin a romance, and Scott buys her nice gifts and takes her on fancy dates. Julia is in love. So Scott suggests they run away together, but before they can leave, they need to make some quick cash. So do you think Julia is going to identify that she's a victim in this right now? She's goo goo gaga in love with Scott, right? He's spoiled her with all these gifts. He's even groomed her friends, right? He's bought them beer. He's the cool boyfriend, the older boyfriend. He goes to college. He works at, you know, maybe a nice job at a bank. Maybe he goes to church with her family every Sunday, right? So he is not the bad person. He is not, in our mind, the image that we have of what a trafficker looks like. It's an important that, you know, if you know someone that's in Julie's situation, whether you're a friend, a coworker, or whatever, a parent, that you actively listen to how she's talking about her relationship. Is he controlling her? Is he dominating? Is he preventing her from interacting with her friends? Again, she's not going to say that he's a bad person. We really have to, again, foster that trust at the very beginning to kind of see, you know, what she gives us in that conversation and go from there. In this case, her vulnerability was that she wanted to be loved. Things that we all want. These vulnerabilities are not like a rare situation or rare scenario. We all listen to our parents. Well, I tried to the most when I grew up. We want to be loved. And that just kind of shows that anyone is prone of being trafficked. Last victim profile, which you all probably know as well, or have seen a situation like this, is Amanda's situation. Amanda's home life was unsafe due to her parents' drug abuse and neglect. Once the abuse was reported, she was removed from her home and placed in foster care. Not long after being placed in a foster home, Amanda's foster father began abusing her. She runs away from her foster home, but has to find a way to survive. Amanda, her profile kind of goes back to that Maslow hierarchy of needs. She does not have the physiological, she does not have that safety, she does not have that sense of love or belonging. She goes looking for it, right? She's going in a survival mode, and whoever can provide that for her and even tell her that, hey, I got you, I'll protect you, I care about you, that void is filled. She's going to stay with that person, right? She's become dependent on that person, especially as a kiddo. So those are kind of our three profiles that we talk about. And I kind of want to talk about that cycle, right? It's kind of very similar to the domestic violence power and control wheel. We really have to have, when we're really wanting to understand what human trafficking is and that relationship that's built between the trafficker and that victim. It's a process. It didn't happen overnight. We have to understand how that manipulation began. By the time we're interacting with our clients, we're seeing the aftermath of all that. We're seeing this person with a broken down personality. We have to understand that process. That trafficker goes in, finds what that person needs in that recruitment process. You know, do they want love? Do they want money? Do they want safety or just attention? And again, it could happen with a pimp or it could happen with a boyfriend. The term bottom girl is someone that was trafficked for quite a long time and basically is just stuck in that cycle. Now she's working for the trafficker. She's kind of the middle person. She is looking for the next victim for that trafficker, and she's probably getting a cut out of it or getting better treatment. She's probably in love with the trafficker as well, whatever it is. But that bottom girl has now kind of been is the middleman throughout that recruitment process. But with that trafficker, he studies her personality. He studies her vulnerabilities. You know, once he grooms her, he gets her to do this, you know, he pushes her personal boundary by asking her to strip one time for his friends, and they'll pay for, the rent for the month. He's pushing her boundaries slowly. And then usually at that point, he has some sort of blackmail to where whenever he wants to do that again, he wants to exploit her again. If she does say no, he now has that perfect blackmail to keep her in that cycle. And that grooming process, we're seeing that he's slowly isolating her from her family and friends so that she can't ask for help. He's breaking down her personality. Maybe he's insulting her, making it saying, hey, like no one else cares about you. I'll take care of you. I want you to wear this. I want you to talk like this. And of course that turning out, that's when that relationship now has, turned into that bad experience where he's, fully exploiting her. There's that short honeymoon period of, I'll never do it again. I promise I won't. And then again, he exploits her. I always kind of go back to domestic violence. Before doing this job, I was very ignorant when it came to what domestic violence looked like. I always thought it was the full-blown story of this woman brutally beaten, this broken jaw. That was what I thought of domestic violence, but we know it can look like so many other things. It could be, emotional abuse, mental abuse. It could start off with just a slap on the face. It's still domestic violence. And that's kind of the same thing with human trafficking. It's not that, overnight full blown, this woman's in a cage and was just brutally beaten and had sex with 45 men that first night. It could be where he pushes her boundary that one time and asks her to strip. And that process, it takes some time. And in between, he is trying to make it up with adding more money or more safety or whatever it is. It's much more insidious, like we said, than that person popping out of the bush. If only that would be so much easier to catch all the bad people. We could just go through all these bushes and see if traffickers are in there. But we have to understand how throughout that whole process, how she feels. Even at the very end, when it comes to asking for help, she is going to feel weaker. She's going to feel dirty. She's going to feel embarrassed to ask for help from anybody because at that point she feels like she's tarnished. And she knows how society views victims of human trafficking or commercial sex. So that's kind of what we talk about in this slide, and it's very similar to domestic violence. And I don't know if you all heard, but with domestic violence, it takes a person on average 7 to 8 times to cut off ties from that abuser. Victims of human trafficking takes average 12 to 14 times. So it is, we talk about how that person goes back to that trafficker or another abuser or starts, using another substance. I'm going too much into my slides right now. Let me calm down. I think we're going to take a little bit of a break because it is almost 7. So do we want to do about 7 minutes? It's 6:53 right now. We can wait till 7 and start the other half.
That's fine.
Okay. And if you'll have any questions, unmute yourselves or put it in the chat box.
Would Jeffrey example of what you're talking about of human trafficking?
Yeah, that definitely is human trafficking, but that is like human trafficking on steroids. That is like, the very rare, like celebrity kind of situation.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when we do these trainings, we want to make sure that people know that's human trafficking, but when it comes to situations here in East Tennessee, it's not the Jeffrey Epstein, it's the mom doing it. It's the boyfriend or the husband doing it. It's a coworker doing it. But similar situations where there was grooming was involved.
Yeah.
Isolation was involved. All that was, yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Sure. Give you all a couple minutes to stretch out your legs.
And often we get young girls, 15 and 16, and they can't give us an accurate birth date. They'll give us the day and the month, and then they don't give us the year. And then you kind of say, well, how old are you? So you were born in this year. Oh, no, that's wrong. And like they scramble to get the right year to say that they're 18. But they come in with a gentleman that is 20, 25 years their senior for a pregnancy test. And we kind of have a suspicion that this might be a sex trafficking or some type of trafficking situation. And I was wondering to get your opinion on that.
Well, anytime a kid is not telling you their age, it's always kind of a red flag of why are you not telling me how old you are? If they don't have any sort of ID on them, If boyfriend is around and she's not gonna like, he's kind of controlling the conversation. She's kind of looking at him for approval. Like we've had situations where they kind of give a nod where she can answer the question, or he'll answer on her behalf. It could be just where, he's gotten a girl that's younger than 18 pregnant and he's afraid of those ramifications, or it could be an indicator of sex trafficking. Does she have like a permanent address, or is she just kind of like couch surfing or living with him?
Yeah, she did give us an address, and it actually was a valid address when we did, but we did contact the the trafficking hotline and gave them the information just in the event. As we've been trained, if you suspect or something doesn't look right, report it.
Sure.
Just in the case of caution.
Yeah. And I can always forward you some info cards. Like sometimes it's just good to, if you give out like baggies with like toiletry items, to just kind of slip in a card of saying like, this is what indicators look like. Here's a hotline number. Sometimes when you give them that, it gets them critically thinking of like, maybe I am, like, she genuinely might not know she's being trafficked. I mean, this might be the grooming part of
Yeah.
boyfriend, for her thinking this is nice and he loves her and he's going to take care of her and her baby, whatever it is. So it could be that. I think I would definitely keep an eye on her if she's going to come back and see you all. It's good that you call the hotline to kind of see if maybe he's on someone else's radar. But that's definitely a suspicion. If she's is not telling you her age, and she's the kind of, it's either it's scripted or it keeps changing, that date of her birth, it keeps changing. That's obviously something suspicious.
Okay, that's kind of what we thought, and we do now have, and we do the toiletry and slip the card to her confidentially.
Yeah.
We've got several different ways. We do it for domestic violence, sex trafficking. There's about 4 different cards depending on the situation that we can give to people.
And we'll talk about the next couple of slides, kind of the quote screening process of like how to do that, how to have that conversation, because we never want to say, hey, are you being sex trafficked? That's always going to give you a negative response. But there are definitely some ways in fostering that trust for that person to, open up to you. And once they say that one thing, those floodgates open and everything comes out usually. So we'll go through the next couple slides of what that screening process, or how to have that conversation with someone.
That's what I'm looking for. Thank you. I'm gonna mute me again.
Okay. I think everyone is back. Everyone has stretched their legs and hydrated. We're ready for our second part. And I love how this group is interactive. I hate when no one talks. It's so awkward. So thank you all for talking. It's just not fun to talk to myself. So we know it's happening here. We know that there's definitely some high risk populations that we have to keep our eye on. But we always have that question from the audience: why don't they just leave? It's easier said than done. We don't know what they're going through. There's many reasons. We talk about vulnerabilities again, right? That person may have experienced some sort of traumatic stress in their life to where their trafficker came in at that point, the opportune moment, and filled in that void. So maybe that person was unable to pay for rent, COVID, taken, they've been furloughed. Maybe that person lives alone and is isolated and can't go anywhere and wants to feel loved, or they went through a breakup, or they had a death of a family member or a loved one, or were sexually assaulted by somebody, or there are many reasons. Those negative pushes in our lives that we can't control. That trafficker comes in at that opportune moment in that person's life, fills in that void or need, right? And that's where they look like they're the perfect person. They are just a sweet neighbor, or the person that goes to your church, or that person that's the ref for the Pee Wee basketball league on the weekends, right? They never look like they're the bad person. A lot of times that individual does not recognize that they're being trafficked, right? With familial trafficking and intimate partner trafficking, perfect examples. Little Sammy, I think that's what his name is, not going to acknowledge that mom is trafficking him because it's normalized behavior. Usually everyone else in the family is pretty aware of it. If not, that's very rare, but he's not going to acknowledge that he's being trafficked. He just might think that he's being abused, and everyone else in other families has, this happens to them. Or, when you're in a relationship with somebody, a victim's in a relationship with a trafficker, they're going to groom them slowly to think that this is all normalized. So that's one of the things that we see. Another reality is that they've been convinced to lie. because of that force, fraud, or coercion, trafficker has put them in, put in their minds that they could go to jail if they fess up at what happened, that they'll traffic their kids, that they'll harm them, they'll harm the loved ones. So for them, it's better off that they just keep their mouth shut because they're scared of those ramifications if law enforcement gets involved or how the community will look at that person. So they're just better off keeping their mouth shut and not saying anything. The loyalty to trafficker, I think, out of all these, just a couple of reasons why that person won't leave. I think the loyalty to the trafficker is the hardest to cut ties with. We talk about trauma bonds. Trauma bonds are exactly what they sound like. Do you all have a friend or somebody you know that is in a toxic relationship? And they break up with that person, they get back together, and they break up and they get back together. And you're like, oh my gosh, how are you doing this? Do you not see this toxicity in the relationship? And that is exactly what a trauma bond is. That is what these victims are going through, is that cycle of abuse, whether it's emotional, physical, or mental. And then there comes that little honeymoon period, and it's that cycle over and over again, which fuels this need of love, of validation from that victim, from their abuser, right? They're just saying, well, maybe he's doing this because he loves me, or if I did this, he wouldn't do that, right? They just want to stay with that person. And not only does it happen in romantic relationships, but it also happens between family members, coworkers, colleagues, friends. So that trafficker is going to condition that person to think that all of this abuse, all the above, the trafficking in general, is completely normal. That every other person goes through this. If you love me, you do this. I did all this for you. You care about, or I care about you. You do the same thing for me. You'd protect me just how I protected you. And unfortunately, the longer that person stays in that relationship or that trauma bond is happening, the more of the need of love or validating that love, they're going to stay with that trafficker. Very similar to Stockholm syndrome. You all heard about that. Psychologists and doctors are now saying that Stockholm syndrome is kind of a coping mechanism for the brain. So that person is going to develop positive feelings towards their abuser. And then they develop negative feelings towards any authority figure. So that could be law enforcement. It could be a social worker, just anyone that's trying to get them away from their trafficker. In their eyes, is the bad person, because that's what trafficker has kind of instilled or brainwashed in their brain, to think that anyone that's trying to take you away from me hates you, jealous, whatever it is, you're better off staying with me. And of course, the immediate needs may be great and overwhelming. Maybe that person is just homeless, is a kid, has no other option, and they're going into survival mode. So those are a few examples of why they're stuck in that situation. There's a lot of gray area. We have to understand there are a lot of barriers for them when it comes to asking for help and leaving that situation. They're scared. They don't know what's going to happen to them next. So those are a couple reasons why they might not leave. So we know what's happening. We know there's high-risk populations. We know that kind of the reality of why they can't leave, or why they're scared to leave, or whatever it is. How on earth is this thriving? How is this the second highest crime in the world? How is this thriving in a first world country? And one important thing we need to know when it comes to trafficking is that traffickers are lazy, but they are smart business people. They know how the system is. They know how to stay off the radar. They know how to make their actions fly under the radar. Human trafficking is incredibly profitable, the low risk of getting caught. So it's much easier to explain the presence of, a person rather than the presence of guns or drugs. So let's say I'm a bad person driving in my car. I get pulled over by a cop and I'm trying to sell one AK-47, right? It's a big gun. The risk of getting caught is pretty big because it's hard to hide that. If I don't get caught, then I have a pretty low reward, right, from this one item that I've sold. If I have some marijuana and I get pulled over, it's easier to hide, maybe like under the seat, whatever it is, throw it out the window. If I don't get caught, the reward is higher, right, because I have a couple bags of that. But when it comes to selling a human being, how many times can I sell somebody? Over and over again, right? An infinite amount of times. Can anyone guess how many times a victim is sold in a day?
5 to 10, roughly, probably.
20 to 40 times a day.
Oh, well, low.
6 to 7 times a week, or 6 to 7 days a week. So it's crazy. Within one day, Victim is sold 20 to 40 times a day. It's the perfect crime. Yeah, I'm not bashing on law. No one is going to think that if I get pulled over and there's a person right next to me that's not chained, that doesn't have a piece of duct tape over their mouth, they're going to think that's my friend. They're going to think that's my partner, my sister,
Yeah.
whoever. They're not going to question that that person is a victim or in danger. And that's why it's the perfect crime, because no one would assume that. You know, drugs and weapons are more of the, you know, the bad thing, that's the illegal thing, but having a person in the car, no one's going to assume that. A study back in 2010 found that one pimp held a $500 daily quota. So each person, or for one victim or individual, that was the pimp told him to make $500. Let's say that he has a total of 4 victims, and this guy is obviously not paying his taxes or putting this on his tax return. He probably made over $600,000 off of those 4 victims if they told themselves 20 to 40 times a day, 6 to 7 days a week. So it is incredibly profitable with that low risk of getting caught. So that misconception that people want to go into this. I've had younger generation in college talking about sex working and what's that country, Amsterdam, and how prostitution is legal there. I can guarantee the majority of those women that are doing it overseas probably were sex or human trafficked at the very beginning and got stuck in that cycle. I think there was a study about the sex workers in Nevada. It just said the majority of those women were sex trafficked at the very beginning and were just stuck in that cycle. At that point, they felt like they had no escape, that they had tarnished their name and their image, and that their family was aware of it. So it's very rare that you have someone that wakes up, you know, in the morning when they're a kid saying, "What I want to do when I grow up, I want to do sex working." We're just seeing that there is, unfortunately, there's a demand. I'm not going to go on that tangent, but this would not be thriving unless there was a demand. And unfortunately, there is a demand that we also have to talk about. There's people out there that want to buy women and kids, or just people in general, and have sex with them. So we have to address that mental health issue about that. But there will be no money made if there was no demand. And we're seeing, when it comes to the common John, the purchaser, it is the 40 to 60-year-old white male, Caucasian male, that is affluent. We're seeing at least 40 to 50% of them are married and have been married for 10 years plus, have a college degree. So the purchasers are people that look like us. You know, it's not like the dude that wears certain clothing and drives a certain car and has tattoos all over his face. It could be anybody. That kind of goes into my next slide. Who are traffickers? We know at this point, traffickers could really be anybody. It's not exclusive to pimps and gang members. We have had a couple of our survivors at our safe house that their trafficker was in a gang. We do know there's some gangs here in Knoxville and East Tennessee, but the majority of our survivors were trafficked by a family member, by a spouse, by a friend, by a boss, by a coworker. Really could be anybody. Well, actually now it's been longer. Think back when we officially had those mask mandates in Knoxville, there was some people weren't happy about that and wrote to us just saying, you know, this is going to make it even harder for you to find these kids and the traffickers because the masks are going to be covering up their face and whatnot. And yeah, to a certain extent, but the issue is not the mask. The issue is the relationship that trafficker has with that kiddo. Our director of youth services, Lisa Bolton, wrote a really great blog on our website, which you all should check out. And she talks about how social media plays a very big role in, you know, not giving the best accurate information about human trafficking and what it looks like here in East Tennessee. And she mentioned in this blog, which I pulled this from her blog, saying that traffickers don't have to conceal their identities behind a mask. They don't have to hide their victims behind a mask either. They already have the best cover up of all, that of a parent, that of a boyfriend. The relationship they've cultivated makes it easy for them and their actions to fly under the radar. And that's unfortunately the truth, is that a mask is not going to be the reason why we're not catching these traffickers or helping these survivors. It is that relationship that is built between them that makes it very challenging for us to see those indicators. So we're talking about identifying, these are just a couple of red flags. And when in doubt, go with your gut feeling. I mean, earlier, the woman on the young lady on the microphone I was talking to, I forgot her name. I'm horrible with names, but she just had this gut feeling. Go with that gut feeling. We never want to go about it in an accusatory way, but if you have that feeling, ask. in a very natural conversation way of, hey, I'm worried about you or whatever it is. But there are some indicators that we're seeing that are quite common when it comes to our survivors that we serve, is that they usually have injuries, bruises, healing at various stages around their wrist, around their arms, around their neck, from the trafficker beating them, from the John that's purchasing them, beating them. They've become socially isolated from their family and friends. They don't have any ID or documents. I always ask people in the audience who's lost their ID before. A couple of people raise their hand, and I ask them, how much of a pain is it to replace that ID? Driving to the DMV, having all the supporting documents, waiting in line and whatnot, and then you get your ID, right? But what do you have to have in order to replace your ID? Some sort of supporting ID, a passport, whatever it is, proof of a permanent address. And for a lot of these victims, they don't have that. They don't have the proof of a permanent address. They don't have their birth certificate. A lot of times traffickers have taken their birth certificate, their ID, what else is their social security card, and have destroyed it or have withheld it, because it's impossible to replace an ID if you don't have those other documents. And if you don't have those documents here in the U.S., it's impossible to do anything, to find a job. I mean, heck, if you want to stay at the Salvation Army, you have to have an ID. So he knows what he's doing when he's taken all of that from her and preventing her from leaving that situation. Even for applying to a minimum wage job, you have to have that documentation. You have to have that permanent address. If you don't have any of that, you can't do anything. That person's inappropriately dressed for the weather. It's winter time, they're wearing summer attire, they're wearing the same clothes for a long period of time. If it's a kiddo, maybe they have poor hygiene, they're wearing the same sweater for the past week and a half. Signs of drug and alcohol abuse. Again, we've kind of touched base of traffickers will lure people in using drugs or some sort of substance. We have had some folks that were using it beforehand, but the majority we're seeing is that these survivors weren't even using a drug before they met their trafficker. It was when they met their trafficker and kind of got stuck in that cycle where he used it as blackmail. Obviously, signs of physical or sexual abuse, which might be challenging for you all to see. And evidence of controlling or dominating relationships. I always use this story as an example because sometimes those indicators are not going to be like apparent from the first time you see that person. It might, if you have that, capability of seeing them more than once, or you have that relationship with them, that indicator might take some time for you to see it. But we had a doctor that did a training with us, and he had this patient that would come in every month or every other month for STD testing. She always tested positive, and she'd always show up with her boyfriend. Usually when you come with a partner, they ask if you're sexually active, and if you're dating somebody or if you're married to somebody, that they test them as well to make sure if they have, if they've tested positive or negative. Well, she would always test positive and he'd always test negative. And it didn't dawn on him until I guess he saw some other indicators of him like answering her questions, that, usually if she tests positive and he tests negative, boyfriend's freaking out of, who are you sleeping with? Like, if I don't have it, who'd you get it from? So it kind of was his aha moment when he's like, okay, she's not answering the questions. He's answering the questions. She's really quiet. I saw some bruising on her leg, and he's always testing negative. She's testing positive. And every time I say that, he's like, all right, cool. Can you just give us our antibiotics and we'll get out of your way? So that was his aha moment of saying, actually, there's one more thing I need to do with her. If you don't mind just stepping out of the office or out of the room, I'd like to have some privacy with me and her. And he talked to her. And surely she did say that she was that she was in a very dangerous situation, that she was scared, but she didn't want to get him in trouble. So he offered our information, and she actually stayed at her safe house. So sometimes those indicators are not always going to be apparent and right then and there. It might take some time for you to build that relationship, that friendship with that person, and seeing those indicators. Complications. I'm not sure if you all will see this with the people that you work with, or it could be friendship or relationship, or whatever it is. But usually the first week or two, when our clients or survivors, stay at our safe house, it is constant visits to the doctor's office. They have not gone to the doctor in God knows how long. If they have, it's the emergency room where they have had an infection from shooting up drugs, or if their trafficker has beaten them or their purchaser has beaten them and they have some sort of infection. But usually that first week or two, it's constant visits to the doctor's office. So if you're in that field where you're working with somebody, figure out what are those needs right then and there. Do they need some sort of emergency assistance, or taking them to the hospital themselves? Figure out what that is. But usually we're seeing scarring, fractures. They're malnourished. Sometimes if they don't make their quota for the day, they don't get their candy bar for the day. They're exhausted, they're sleep deprived. We're seeing the sexual complications of STIs, STDs, obviously, pelvic inflammatory disease. They've had to do a couple of abortions. Takes a toll on the body for sure. For me, the psychological complications, I think, is the most extreme thing that is hard. It doesn't go away, unfortunately. I wish I could tell you that they come to us, everything is hunky-dory, they stay with us for a month or two, and it's like they never were trafficked. That's not the reality. A lot of times they're going to have to live with the psychological effects of being trafficked and that trauma they're exposed to. We give them the tools and resources and work with them, and helping them throughout that process of living a life of being free. So that PTSD, that depression, that anxiety, we'll see it quite often at the safe house, and even after, when they're on their own and they've graduated our program, it's common for them to have those triggers and those flashbacks and that anxiety. And we're always there for them. It's not like once they graduate, we don't see them. We actually had a client that graduated last February, and she came to see us not too long ago and has gotten back with her husband. She has full custody now of her kids, and she's working. So I don't want to be Debbie Downer with all this, but they can live a good life after, but they definitely are going to have a lot of challenges and barriers. Unique medical issues, just a couple more. These folks are going to have those chronic health complications. They don't go to physicals once a year. They're going to have that chronic pain from just the constant cycle of stress and trauma takes a toll on the body. We've seen how some of them have developed asthma and dental problems from being punched in the face or use some sort of substance where there's an infection in their jaw. That chronic fatigue and the tattoo and branding. I think I always touch base on that. I just put a picture of this one, but usually we've seen pictures of barcodes on their neck, or very vulgar messages of "F you, pay me," or "Ricky's hoe," or even logos that traffickers brand their victims with. And I always ask people, what do we put barcodes on? Things that we buy, products, right? So for a trafficker, he knows what he's doing when he brands her with a barcode or with something like, "F you, pay me" on her neck. He knows how it's going to make her feel. It's going to play into her self-esteem and how she thinks of herself. And he knows how society is going to look at her and say, "Yikes, I don't want to be around that person. That person seems like they're trouble." So he knows if he dresses her like a prostitute, she looks like a prostitute, she talks like a prostitute, she has a prostitution charge on her, that no one's going to want to interfere or be in her business, that it's not their problem. So I know that you all have heard of trauma-informed care, but it's important that if you are in that field and you're working with a client, a patient, a friend, whoever it is, to always be aware and using the proper trauma-informed care. We always want to, prevent avoiding that re-traumatization. When we're talking to somebody about their history or they want to open up, we never want to trigger them with their history or whatever it is. So be conscious of your body language. If that person feels comfortable to talk to you about, their trauma, whatever they've gone through, we want to maintain that eye contact, not in a creepy way. I always joke around where I have RBF, so I always look angry whenever I'm like really actively listening to somebody or reading something. I tend to look really angry all the time. So before this job, I was doing intake at the crisis center, and I always, as an icebreaker, would tell people, I just look angry and like constipated. So just disregard the way I look right now. I'm with you. I'm listening. Being aware of your physical reactions to history. You might have someone that tells you that they had sex with 20 guys last night. We don't want to gasp. They might think that we're judging them. We obviously don't want to be like, okay, you go, girl. You know, I've learned that pauses and head nods will take you far, because we want them to talk. We want them to open up. We want that individual to lead that conversation. We don't want to probe for questions, especially if we're not a trained professional. We don't want to, you know, have that person explain that story 6 times. If you can have an advocate, or you are an advocate, then I think that would be a better situation. Highlighting those strengths and resilience. Be their cheerleader. They might tell you, I've been clean for a week. Celebrate that. They don't have that in their life. They need that person in their life. They're going to feel like everything is a lost cause for them. It's okay for, you know, I think it's good to validate their feelings at that moment. We don't want to disregard how they're feeling. We can tell them, hey, given your, you know, your circumstances and what you've gone through, it's okay to feel that way. I would feel the exact same way. So we want to validate it and not just kind of say, you'll be fine, don't worry. Promoting that healing and recovery. So connect to resources. Let us be a resource for you guys. Let us be an advocate for you guys as well. If you don't feel comfortable, or you don't have that knowledge of how to touch base on those, you know, sensitive topics or subjects, let us be an advocate for you guys. We never want to impose our own goals. Sometimes it might be challenging for them to create their own goals. They're not used to that. They're used to someone telling them what to do, what to wear, what to say. So that might be a process. If you are in that field of writing their case management plan, getting them involved in that. Ask them, what do you want to do this week? It could be something as simple as, you know, making their bed every day, or applying for a job, or writing a resume out, or, you know, start getting their GED. Letting them choose their own goals is a very empowering feeling for them. And lastly, doing those healthy coping skills. They might have a negative coping mechanism of using a substance or cutting or whatever it is, and know that if we take that out, we have to fill that void in with something else, because they're going to have this void that needs to be filled. So educating them through that whole process of, hey, you might feel like you're going crazy, and that's actually normal. It's because you feel this way. So always educate, normalize throughout the whole process. Let them be part of that conversation and give them room to discuss. So those are a couple of tips that we recommend for you guys. If you feel comfortable, if you have that opportunity of working with a survivor, a client, I always kind of touch base of understanding the needs of a trafficked individual. And this is more for kids, but this could also work for an adult that's been trafficked or have the suspicion of being trafficked. We always want to understand or assess the physical health and behavioral health. A lot of times they have gone through that emotional or sexual abuse, suffered some broken bones, untreated internal injuries, STIs, STDs. We really have to address that first to make sure that foundation is somewhat stable when we are helping themselves build themselves back up. Excuse me. We want to make sure that we're screening and we're having the proper mental health screening tools, and if not, to contact us or someone that you know who has experience with kids, especially that have been trafficked. So collaboration with agencies is really important when it comes to working with these individuals, because it's there's a lot of complex issues with these kiddos. Kids who have been trafficked are gonna, usually need some sort of immediate housing or a safe place to live. And given their background, a traditional foster care setting might not be the best for them for the time being. And sometimes foster families might not feel prepared for that. And that's why we do those traffickings of these trainings for these families, just in case. We've had, I think, at least 3 or 4 foster parents that keep in touch with us. They've had situations where kids are doing great and then they get triggered by something and they call us and we just tell them, hey, like, this is a good way to help de-escalate or to ground them or whatever it is. But they might need some special foster care setting, or rather than that traditional foster care setting. We talk about education. They might need some sort of remedial services, or the traditional option of schooling might not be the best for them given their sensitive situation. So we always want to keep that in mind. Employment. A lot of these kids, I had mentioned earlier, the psychological effects are going to be with them forever. That means even when they age out and they turn into adults, it's important that we help them kind of go back to that normal life. Even when it comes to getting a job, they're not going to have that work experience. Given that they've been trafficked, they might have been arrested for crimes that they committed in that process, which prevents them from passing a background check, which is required for most jobs nowadays. And given their history of these kids, they are used to making large amounts of money in a short period of time. So good old minimum wage job is not going to be something they are happy with. That's important why we have mentors or internship programs for these kids in that transition process to show them that this is life and it's actually normal. You just start out from the bottom. We can go, grow back up, but they're not going to be happy with, these jobs that pay little because they were used to, making more. And there is a likelihood they can go back to trafficking because of that. They see that they were used to a certain way of living and making so much, a certain amount of money that this minimum wage is not for them. And other needs, opening a bank account, keeping medical records, things that no one taught them what to do, how to use, all that stuff. Those are, basic needs, basic life skills that a lot of these kids are going to have a mentor in their life to do that. And I was talking to, oh man, I'm horrible with names, but someone from United Way, we were talking about these mentor programs. I love the cause, or just like the fact that we have these, but what's dangerous about these mentor programs, if they're for a 6-week period, something just short term, and actually can do damage to a kid because they've finally built this relationship. They trust this person, opening up to this person, and that person is left because it was volunteer hours or required for a class or a program. So it's important that when we put these kids in mentor programs, it is a long-term mentor program, not something short term. So that's just kind of understanding their basic needs. Which I can forward you all this PowerPoint because I know it's a lot. This is a screening tool that we provide to agencies or business or organizations that work with kiddos. And we have one for adults as well. These are questions that we ask you guys to ask in a very natural conversation. So we don't want you to go down with these bullet points and just ask this bullet point, this bullet point. We want you all to have a very natural conversation, and you can incorporate these questions in that natural conversation. And if they answer yes to any of these, that might be a positive screen of human trafficking or for high risk. So we can send you this as well, and I can send it to Carrie to forward out to you guys. But please don't just read this verbatim because it's going to intimidate the kid. We obviously don't want to be like, I'm screening you for a human trafficking tool. They're going to shut down. But you can ask questions and paraphrase them to kind of really understand their background and their history. And this is a personal assessment for themselves. Say they don't want to talk to you. Say they don't feel comfortable in answering these questions. Put it in their folder. If they want to take it home and fill it out. Again, maybe them seeing these questions and the way that they're asked. And like I said, I like how it has isolation, self-doubt, promises, threats to kind of help categorize that. They might get something in their mind critically thinking of, okay, this is actually my boyfriend has been controlling and has been threatening me and has been, doing all these false promises. Maybe I am in a very dangerous situation. So this is given to individuals that really don't feel comfortable answering those questions in front of you guys and might feel better doing it by themselves in a private area. This is a kind of a quote I pulled from our therapist's permission from a client of ours and how she felt throughout that process when she was trafficked. Guys, traffickers are mind manipulators. They have brainwashed their victims into thinking that there's no escape. And that's kind of one thing we want to prep you guys is that, these individuals are going to think dirty of themselves, that it's all a lost cause, that they don't want your help. They're not going to be, these people are like, yes, please help me, save me, occasionally. But these people are going to just have this thought process on life and that everything is just a lost cause and hopelessness and helplessness. We have people always say, well, are there special treatments? Is there a special case management for individuals that have been trafficked? There's not. We just have to have resilient people and a very resilient case management plan that might have to be modified every week based off of how that individual reacts and what their goals are. This person's going to have a lot of complex issues as opposed to one issue. There isn't a different therapeutic path. Our expectations and our perceptions have to kind of change because these people are going through a lot of unique effects. And one of those is the loss of self, loss of identity. We are talking about people that have been dehumanized over and over and over again. They've been broken, their personality's been broken down. And at that point, when they come to us, they have no desire or interest in improving themselves, their life. They are just there functioning. And it's very sad to see them at that point. But it's always a wonderful feeling to see once they graduate our program, how they started at rock bottom and how they've grown in so many ways. And just, kind of blossom back to the person that they were before they met their trafficker, and even stronger at that point. Is this going to play for me? I really want to play this video for you guys. So I'm going to stop the screen and show you all this video, because this is the video I watched before I started grad school. And it really kind of solidified or just kind of confirmed why I chose public health, why it's something that I'm passionate about. And the title is called Working Upstream, which I've been using with you guys, of us working upstream, because some of you all might not work with a person that's been trafficked, but many of you all, every single one of you guys, you're going to be in contact with someone who is vulnerable, who has vulnerabilities. So we can't always help someone that's been trafficked, but we can always help someone that is vulnerable, someone that needs help, someone that needs that support or those resources. So that's kind of this video, if it would work. It's about a 2-minute video, and I hope, yeah, there we go. And I will reshare my screen.
There was once a carpenter.
Stop talking.
That lived by a river in a village near you. Every day, with his trusty hammer, he built boats out of wood. One day, as the carpenter was working, he looked out onto the river and saw a child trying to swim towards the shore. "Help," said the child. "The current is too strong." So the carpenter grabbed a boat and rescued the child. "How did you get into the river?" asked the carpenter. "I fell in upstream," said the child. The next day, when the carpenter looked out onto the river, he saw 2 children struggling to swim towards the shore. "Help," the children said. The carpenter called out to another villager, and together they rescued the children. But the next day, there were 5 children, and the next day, there were 12, and soon the whole village was busy rescuing children from the river. The villagers grew weary, and some of the boats started to leak and break from overuse. The carpenter worked tirelessly to repair them, but as the number of children in the river grew, soon there weren't even enough boats to get the job done. One day, the carpenter asked himself a question. Why and how are so many children falling into the river in the first place? So he bravely ran upstream to find out. There, he saw a big, windy village with many houses, and some of the houses were in a state of disrepair. And when the wind blew especially hard, the houses creaked and cracked, and things were swept out of them and into the nearby river. Sometimes what was swept up was children. The carpenter saw an old lady walking by. "Excuse me," he said to the old lady, "tell me, why are these houses so broken down? Why aren't these houses stronger?" "The people of this village want to fix these houses so that they can resist the wind," the old lady replied. "But we do not have the tools to do so, and the wind lately has been especially strong." "I can help," said the carpenter. And with the help of the old lady, he gathered the villagers, gave them his hammer, and taught them how to use it so that they could learn to make their houses strong when the wind blew especially hard and keep their children from falling into the river. Yay! Because you see, if we make the effort to go upstream and help build strong foundations there, we won't need to work so hard to rescue children downstream.
Amen.
Yeah, that always gives me goosebumps, because we obviously want to save the people that are falling in the river, these kids, these people. But what if we could work upstream? What if we could help these vulnerable populations to where they're not vulnerable anymore? If we could think 2 steps ahead of the trafficker and take care of the folks that need that support, that need that help and those resources, then we can end it. So that's kind of the video that I hope motivates you guys and pumps you all up, and just, I know that you all are advocates, because you all are doing this training right now. If you didn't care, you wouldn't sign up for this training. So I was like showing that video and just saying that, this is a public health issue that has to be addressed. Our silence means that we're complicit. We don't want to be a tool for the trafficker and continuing what he's doing. So where to start when people say, what can I do? Encouraging those healthy behaviors, having that conversation, talking about what human trafficking is. If we can't talk about it to our family and friends, how do we expect this issue to go away? So encouraging those healthy behaviors with even your kids. We have to talk about to our kids that, using social media and having the internet is a privilege. There's some things that we have to be careful about. We just can't, stalk them and take away their phone and whatnot. They're going to find a way. Kids are smart. So we have to talk to them like they're young adults and let them understand that there are things out there that could harm them, even if they can't see it right then and there. Of course, we want to foster those safe homes and neighborhoods. If you live in an area where you're seeing there's a large homeless population, or there's cases of domestic violence, or you have a lot of homeless shelters, what are some ways that we can help out and work with those vulnerable populations and addressing those vulnerabilities? And obviously ending business profits with any like labor trafficking businesses. So I always tell people that we want to be careful what we're buying and supporting certain businesses that we know labor trafficking, at least it happens more often overseas. There's plenty of apps nowadays that you can see and scan your clothing to determine if there was any sort of suspicious labor trafficking, or if the workers that made that clothing were paid. So always kind of be cautious of what you're purchasing. I know we can't do that all the time, because I love me a good sale, and I would rather buy a $20 shirt than a $60 shirt. But I would say, like, maybe during the holidays, make a promise to yourself and tell your family and friends to do the same thing as well. I think this might, so suggested protocol: if you are ever in contact with someone that is in a situation where they're needing assistance, obviously provide those immediate medical services. If they're, they need to change clothes, sleep for a couple of days, whatever it is, make sure that they're somewhat stable. And then we call DCS if they're a kid. Obviously kids cannot consent to sex. So if they are a minor, we don't have to prove that there's any sort of force, fraud, or coercion. That's immediately human trafficking. So that's a number for DCS. You want to write down the number of the case number whenever they give it to you. They're going to ask if you want the case number. Yes, we want the case number. Then we want to call TBI and connect them and give them the case number. Now they will call TBI, but we know that a lot of times things with the state can happen kind of slow. So we want to speed up that process as much as we can. And throughout each phone call, when you're talking to DCS, TBI, ask them, what else do I need to know? Educate yourself throughout that process as well. Call law enforcement if you can provide the case number as well to them. Keep everybody in the loop and speed up that whole process. And call us. Usually DCS will call us whenever they have a situation, but if you want to get us informed, or even if you have a suspicion, that is our hotline number. It's a 24-hour hotline number. You don't have to, give us that person's name if it's just kind of like in a situation where you have an irky feeling. We've had a situation where someone called about somebody and that person had stayed at our safe house a year before. So you never know. You're doing the good job and the good deed of, informing DCS and TBI and us. So that's our suggested protocol. We never want you to go up to that person and say, are you being trafficked? If that person is with a potential trafficker, we'd never want to intervene right then and there. We might be endangering them. You might be endangering yourself. Unless it's like some sort of emergency situation where he's like brutally beating her or something or whatever it is. But for the most part, we say not to intervene right then and there, just for your safety as well. So that's our suggested protocol if you do come into contact that someone is being trafficked or there's that high suspicion of trafficking. These are our numbers from last year of who we served and the numbers we served. We served 33 counties in East Tennessee. Large amount of those cases are, I think, more like in Northeast Tennessee. I'm trying to touch base with more folks in Chattanooga, but I've not done that many trainings. So if you all know people more like towards Middle Tennessee, because we cover Chattanooga all the way to Bristol, let me know so I could do a training with them. So we had 226 reports last year. We had 157 folks that we served, whether that was in our safe house or us visiting them at group homes or foster care. And as you all can see, 101 of those served were kids. That number is growing, unfortunately. we trained over 4,600 community members. Like I said, it's law enforcement, DCS, social services, human services, foster parents, anyone you can, law enforcement, law students, medical students, dental hygienists, so we have trained truck stop managers, people that might come into contact with these vulnerable populations. We have 40 active community partners, so they have resources for us if we're needing someone in the Chattanooga area to help provide housing for one of our clients that's needing to kind of leave her situation. We have lots of community partners to help us out. That's our 2020 stats. What you can do to help us out and with our agency and our mission, if you've not followed us on social media, follow us. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and this month, with it being Human Trafficking Awareness Month, we are putting lots of content on there, and we actually have some videos that we posted just talking about, what does it look like? They're like short little clips. We even have a video that was posted yesterday. We interviewed our executive director, Natalie Ivey, who is a lawyer, talking about a very controversial topic of what's the difference between decriminalizing commercial sex versus legalizing it. Because those are how people say, well, if we legalize it, would we see less cases of it? So she really goes into detail with her experience and with her degree of kind of how that really would not help the situation. So check that out on Facebook. I think it's like a 7-minute clip. Add us on our social media, donating. Our success with our clients would not be possible if we did not have the community support. You all know that nonprofits, we are basically half funded by, people that donate. And that goes towards survivors when it comes to therapy, housing, medical visits, buying them clothing, feeding them. So if you can help support our mission as survivors we serve, we definitely appreciate that. I mean, if you want to make a meal for a survivor, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have meal trains at our safe house. You would not believe that those meals make their day, rather than us getting them like KFC or something. Having a home cooked meal from someone, a stranger that doesn't know them, cares about them, loves them, wants just love on them, makes their day. So any way you can donate, please. And of course our training. So you all kind of had our 101 and 102 training, in the process of adding more trainings to our catalog. I really like to touch base more on the purchasers and buyers, but then again, it's hard to get that research. So I want to make sure that we have enough research and to make that training available. But those are a couple ways you can help us out. Tell a friend, do a training. These trainings are for free. I can do them in person. We obviously have some, rules of wearing masks and social distancing. I can do it on Zoom. I could do it in a box with a fox. I could do it wherever. I want to do trainings for anyone I can do. So please recommend our trainings to family members, friends, coworkers, organizations. We want to make sure that everyone is on the same page and genuinely understands what human trafficking looks like here in East Tennessee. Numbers that you all have not saved on your phone, the Tennessee Human Trafficking Hotline, and that's through TBI, that top number. And then you have the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That's through Polaris Project. They're the nonprofit, non-governmental organization. They have also research, and they do some trainings. I think they also have some victim services as well, but they're a great website to always kind of keep yourself updated on. They have stats on each state, but again, we know that all that's underreported, but definitely you should check them out. And then the bottom number is our hotline number. That's 24 hours. We have always a housing support specialist to answer the phone and to do intake as well if you have an emergency situation. Real quick about us as an agency. I think you all know at this point, one of our biggest things is raising awareness about what human trafficking is. We not only train primary responders, we train everyone. We have a task force that meets up monthly. We have folks from DCS, law enforcement, TBI, DA's office. It's a diverse group of folks meeting up once a month, talking about any sort of challenging cases with our kiddos, making sure that we are filling in those gaps, whether it's, victim services or, educational things that we can add into the community. But we meet up monthly with that. So we're always trying to keep ourselves up to date. If we have a kid that's constantly running away or disappearing, usually 2 or 3 people know about that kiddo in the group. And lastly, we have safe houses. We have 2 now. So we have our short-term safe house, which honestly they could stay as long as they want, but with our short-term safe house, we're making sure they are stable at that point, that they can go on to the next step of just kind of stabilizing themselves, finding a job, whatever it is. So that short-term safe house is located in Knoxville. We now opened a transitional safe house called Phoenix. Right now it has 2 beds for our survivors. And at this point they are in the process of getting a job or have gotten a job. They're saving up money. They're still doing therapy with our therapist, but they're kind of that next step of independence. So that's a little bit about who we are as an agency and what we do. Like I said, it's Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And one of our biggest things that we're telling everyone to do, especially this month, is to learn, to donate, and to advocate. Obviously, doing a training, you're learning about what it is when you're donating your time, your money. You're helping with our therapy garden. We just started a therapy garden for our survivors, helping maintain that, mowing the lawn, building furniture for a client's new apartment. Once she's graduated our program, there's lots of ways you can donate. Advocating, whether that is having a conversation with a friend that might have a misconception, or if you can go on the legislative level and advocate there. But just being a community advocate is really important. I think for these survivors, it's always inspiring for them to see a complete stranger that doesn't know them, loves them, and cares about them, and wants to advocate on their behalf. So if you can be an advocate for these survivors, you're making their day and their life more than you know. So that's it. There's our website if you have any questions. So we're called CCHT/GrowFree. So you can go to ccht.org or growfreetennessee.org and you'll get to the same place. But I think we have time for some questions if you all want. I think it's 7:52. So if you all want to unmute yourselves or any questions.
I worked at a school, elementary school, and I have been told that if a child, if something's happened, like being abused or whatever, maybe he'll wipe feces on his body and on the walls and stuff because he doesn't want anybody near him. He doesn't want to be abused. Is that true? And is there anything else that I can watch for?
I don't know what that specific example, would make sense that, how old is he?
This would be under 5th grade.
It could be that. Has the child seen a mental health therapist to determine if he's on the spectrum or something?
Well, I work in the cafeteria and I've just, we turn it over to other people.
Right. I would definitely, are the parents aware? Do the parents seem to care whenever they're dropping off the kid, or is it just kind of,
he eventually got turned over to the counselor, and then he was sent to a different school until they could figure out where to place him.
Yeah, it's hard to, I can't say that's definitely suspicion of human trafficking. It could be a reaction from the kid just trying to prevent anyone from touching him, that he knows that action is going to repulse people. It could be also a behavioral issue, but it's hard to answer that.
I see. Okay.
Good question. Any other questions? I know it was a lot. 2 hours of me can be a lot.
In thinking about going upstream, are there ways, because you've talked about, and I totally get it, that once a person's been through this kind of mental abuse, that it's very hard for them to break that, and it takes a long time. So the idea would be to stop them from agreeing to submit themselves to these people. Are there ways to intercept these young people? So there's runaways, there's kids in foster homes or in group care places. Are there programs that are developing that are designed for those people when they're still there before they get out, to talk to them about these are some dangers and we want to help you so that you don't ever feel the need to
kind of like a transition program? That kind of goes back to funding. If these nonprofit agencies have the money, then yeah. But if you're in a rural area, there's lack of resources.
Yeah.
So I would say that there's usually, that's a problem, is that there's not that bridge of, having that mentor or that support, the resources for that kiddo. We talk about like kids in DC or in foster care group homes. They feel like they're overlooked, they don't have enough attention. I would recommend for that specific situation a mentor. But how many mentor programs do we have here, and how often do we have, like a surplus of people that want to do these mentor programs? It's very rare, or it's not as common. It goes back to funding. If we had money to do all this, it would make life easier, but it goes back to funding.
Well, I'm thinking about Catholic social teaching and the virtues that we're supposed, the kind of moral things that we're supposed to do, like go visit people in prisons and things like that. Well, this is getting people when they're young and kind of giving them some support and love and kind of someone to talk to and so forth. It would seem like it would be a logical progression to some of the things that we're supposed to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you all can do that'd be great. I think having that role model, that guardian in their life is definitely going to make a difference long term. Even if they act like they don't want your help at the beginning, kids are kids, teenagers are teenagers, they're never gonna be like, oh, thank you so much. But it's still someone in their life that cares about them, because traffickers told them that no one else cares about them except that trafficker. So why would they leave that? Why would they leave the only person that's supporting them? So again, it's brainwashing. I mean, in their eyes, they're accepting of that. They think that this is normal and that they made that decision, and not necessarily trafficking, but being in that relationship with that trafficker or consenting to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like talk about going upstream. I think about if our society had good medical care and for parents, for adults, and for affordable housing and good paying jobs, this would alleviate.
Oh yeah.
Of it,
Oh yeah. I mean, these are populations that are marginalized in general. I mean, you're having the homeless, LGBTQ, minorities, all these groups that really don't have those resources available for them. Just kind of like a domino effect. If you have one issue, usually there's another underlying issue behind that, and that leads to substance abuse or domestic violence situations. So yeah, if we had all money, I think that would help in providing resources and support and tools for these folks. And that's the problem, is that we don't have enough of that.
Mm-hmm.
If you guys are looking for, sorry, Cheryl, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I don't want to get controversial here, but one of the things that they talked about in Black Lives Matter is the notion of instead of having all the money go to policing, have some of the money go to mental health.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And this is another example of if you could divert some funds, grow the funds, but also have a little bit larger portion go to mental health.
Sure.
And catch these things when people are vulnerable.
Yeah.
We would save so much money, which is what Sue was talking about with some of the things that Justice Knox is doing, where they're really trying to keep people out of prisons by getting them the mental health that they need, the mental health care that they need, so that they don't get arrested because they're acting out on the street and things like that. And this would be yet another example of if we could somehow get our government to kind of reprioritize where it's spending the money and get it upstream.
Yeah, for sure. I think that with that issue is that, when it comes to funding, you always have to have evidence and research and supporting evidence on all that. And it's, how do you have that factual evidence when it comes to mental health? Because either people are denying that they have that mental health issue, or they've not acknowledged it. There's just all these reasons. And how do you get that data from these underserved populations, homeless population, the Black population, and prove, okay, we need money for this when you don't have that information, that evidence. So it's literally just kind of like you try to find one solution, then you like have another issue. But I mean, I definitely agree with you. There has to be money allocated to these mental health services and agencies, and providing help for especially these underserved populations, because they're definitely overlooked, unfortunately.
Yeah, and if the moms are the ones who are trafficking the kid because they don't have enough money to pay rent and things like that, if you address that need, maybe we would reduce it a little bit. So, having all this data that you do have about what are the triggers that cause this to happen is a good starting point for saying, okay, how do we swim upstream and save more kids by fixing the houses? I like that video.
Yeah, thank you.
If you
I'd like
guys, oh, go ahead, Doug.
I'd like to, speaking of swimming upstream, I want to go a little bit deeper. I was a little bit shocked, and I guess I'm showing my ignorance. At the very beginning, we were asked, who would you think would be the trafficker? And the first thought hit my mind was the daddy. And through all our conversations, there's so many of these programs we talk about, and the basic family structure in virtually every situation is literally destroyed. There's no father figure. It's all the mother's burden to raise the kids, to take care of the kids. Where's the daddy? And so, we talk about the bulk of the people are minors, young children. I think of our future, and I'm glad to hear that your program, you're speaking to seniors and juniors in high school, because I think the thought of human dignity, every individual has a responsibility, regardless of the vocation they choose in their life. And if they choose the marriage state, that's serious business, just like any other vocation in life. And I feel like, young kids, they're going to experiment, they're going to seek out, and I appreciate the emphasis there on advocates, role modeling. That's the thing, but I'm just torn at the family structure. And we have so many organizations in our country now that are pushing for the destruction of the family structure. And I don't, that rubs me the wrong way. And this program here, it seems like, you talk about going upstream. The family is the central unit of any society. And if we can keep and maintain the integrity of the family unit through our community laws, state laws, and federal, and then to have what you're talking about, the support, the umbrella programs to support the people who fall off the deep end, which that could be anybody based on their situation. That's just a short point I wanted to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first started this job, it was mind-boggling to think, how could a mother, do this? And then you just hear all these different stories, and again, we're not justifying it, but there are these underlying issues that we also have to address. That kind of, kind of like the breadcrumbs of like the big issue is that these vulnerabilities are issues that anyone can go through, that lots of Americans are going through every day. So it could really happen to anybody.
It
So
reminds
you guys
me.
are all, Cheryl, I'm so sorry. We're going to have to wrap up because we're past our time. I love you guys.
So I'm not in a rush if you are not in a rush.
But I think a lot of what you guys are all commenting on are ways to, I think the video is clearly impactful because you're thinking of upstream issues. And so on top of what Rain has shared with you about how to support their organization, in your own community, remember that like at All Saints, for example, we have a St. Vincent de Paul Society, and their job is to meet needs in our community of people who are vulnerable. And their goal is to work with people in building a relationship and get them out of systemic poverty, get them out of, you know, their situation, not just to put a Band-Aid on it and say, here's another night's hotel room, but here's a more permanent solution. And that's working with community partners. So we just had a really excellent training with Compassion Coalition, and they were teaching us about all these excellent community partnerships. So there's lots of stuff happening in our community. I think about like my Debbie talking about working at a school. My girlfriend, who was a teacher in a low-income school, they did tons of community outreach in their schools' neighborhoods so they could get to know the families, work with the families, build up stronger connections. So there are active things happening already at lots of levels. And I think the good thing is we've brought awareness. You can see, you know, and get involved in some of these things and push, advocate like she shared with us, and help push some of these needs forward. So I really thank you guys for being here. I thank Raina for giving us her time tonight and the wonderful presentation. And this will be, I should have said this at the beginning, but it was recorded. I will trim it down to the presentation part, probably just for the sake of whoever wants to, because I know at least one person knew they couldn't come. And so they asked me if I could record. So, but if you guys want to be able to share that, those actually go on the Catholic Social Teaching page of the website. And so that they're in a specific place for somebody to go and watch all the ones we've done and see what other things there are too. So really appreciate you guys coming out, and thank Raina again. And this won't be the last one. We've only covered, you know, a handful of themes, and even life and dignity as a human person, there are a million topics we could talk about with that. And we do plan to have some other community partners in for that one. So thanks again, and I hope everyone has a good night. I'm sorry I had to cut you guys off. We're just running a little over, so thanks.
And I put
Thank
my
you.
email in the chat box if you all want to touch base with me if you have more questions after this. But my email's in the chat box for you guys. But thank you all for giving me this platform, this opportunity to talk to you guys. I hope to be in touch with you all. I hope this inspired and encouraged you all to be even better advocates.
Thank you
Raina,
very much.
Sue, am I correct? Sue's from another parish, right, Sue?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So you might get some follow-up training, because we don't just represent one church in this little group. So that is a good thing. I'll leave this up long enough for you guys to capture that email. Don't worry about that. But if you're ready to go, you can go. I'll leave us up long enough so that everybody can get her email address if you'd like. Thanks again, guys.
It's been a very good program. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.